Welcome, Sundry readers. I hope you enjoy today's story. Please remember to subscribe. It really helps me out. Happy listening. New Faces, New Friends by Arleta Richardson. Chapter 3. The Lawn Party. Early Friday afternoon, Len and I made our way to the boarding house and waited in the parlor while Becky went to call Colleen O'Shea. The girl who entered won my heart at once. "You will be Mrs. Williams, then," she said as she took my hand. "I'm flattered indeed to be told that I resemble you." Her eyes danced as she turned to Len. "And you'll be the minister. You'll have no trouble telling us apart, I'm bound."
"Not in the least," Len replied. "I'm glad to see you're not annoyed by the chatter around town."
"Annoyed? Mercy, no. I've been likened to worse things than a minister's wife, I can tell you." Her laughter pealed out, and it was impossible not to join her.
"We came to welcome you to North Branch," Len continued, "and to invite you to our church services whenever you can come."
Surprise flickered across her face, and she regarded us seriously. "You mean that your folk would accept me in church in spite of what I do for a living?"
"We don't approve of selling or drinking liquor," Len replied, "but neither do we approve of judging a person on the basis of his occupation. We will be more than happy to see you any time."
"And does everyone share your view?"
"No," Len replied honestly. "There are some who will disapprove and say so, but I believe God shares my view."
"Thank you," Colleen said. "It's not what I want to do. Ma would spin if she knew I was working in a bar, but I'm sure I'll find another job soon. Mrs. Handy and her son have been good to me, and the men are polite, more so than the women." Colleen grinned. "I met an elderly lady and an old gentleman with a cane on the street. She pulled her skirts out of the way, but he tipped his hat. Maybe he didn't know who I was." "That would be the Burtons," I said. "He knew all right, but he has a way of looking past appearances. And Gladys is a good-hearted soul too, Colleen. She feels threatened by sin and doesn't know how to handle it. She can be outspoken at times, but I don't believe she is really mean-spirited." "I appreciate that," Colleen said simply. Then she looked at me and her eyes danced again. "I'll do my best not to cause you sorrow," she said. "I'm not worried about it," I assured her. "I know we are going to be friends." "Rebecca Handy was right," I said to Len as we started home. "Colleen is going to be awfully lonely if no one befriends her at church. She needs friends her age. I've been thinking—" Len grinned at me.
"I know where this is leading," he said. "You're ready to get in a little matchmaking."
"Not necessarily," I protested. "But Hudson Curtis is a nice man, and he's not seeing any of the Greenwood girls at the moment."
"That's because they were all girls when New York was a prairie," Len put in. "There's no one his age over there."
"Well, see, that's what I mean. It wouldn't hurt to invite some folks to a lawn party and include Hudson and Colleen and Elizabeth and some of the younger couples. If they're interested, they can go on from there."
"You know what happens when you begin to make arrangements for other people," Len warned me. "I know you mean nothing but the best, but I'd be sure that both of them are going to appreciate it if I were you."
As we rode along, I reflected that even though Len sounded doubtful, he didn't say, "Don't do it." I could foresee no harm in a little lawn party. But before I had a chance to discuss it with Sarah Jane, things began to move right along. I was in the bank on Monday, depositing the church money, when Hudson Curtis came in. He had the same bewildered look that Sarah Jane wore when she told me about Colleen's arrival in town, so I guessed what had happened.
"Mabel?" Hudson said. "You are Mabel, aren't you? I thought I was talking with you a minute ago across the street. In fact, I chased you, or her, a half a block to speak to you, her."
"And you'd like to know who her is, right?"
"I could have asked her, I guess, but I felt so foolish that I just said sorry and ran. I think she was laughing at me."
"Don't feel bad," I said. "My own husband thought he saw me where I wasn't. Would you like to meet her?"
"I should say I would. Do you know her?"
Len and I called on her this week. Her name is Colleen O'Shea, and she lives at Rebecca's boarding house. Incidentally, that is south of the river."
Hudson looked puzzled for a moment. Then he laughed. "I had that coming," he said. "I guess it wasn't a very good suggestion to give to a fellow minister. What is Miss O'Shea doing in town?"
"At the moment," I said carefully, "she's working at Jake's bar, but she's looking for another job. She seems like a lovely young lady, but that was the only place she could get."
Hudson's face clouded over. "I wouldn't hold that against her, but I'm not sure my parishioners would be that open-minded. People do talk, and that would hurt Miss O'Shea as well as my ministry." I was silent, for I knew that he was right. By the time I concluded my business, I had reached a decision. I tracked Hudson down in his father's office.
"We're going to have a little party with some of our young folks," I said, "and we'd like to have you come. Len will let you know when it will be." "Now we're committed," I said to Sarah Jane. "I told Hudson we'd get together."
"We? I don't remember saying I'd be a participant in any such scheme."
"You know you will. Nothing short of a broken leg would keep you from it. Shall we have it at our house?"
"That would be the most pleasant," Sarah Jane said. "It's cooler there by the river. Whom are we going to invite?"
"First, I had thought just the younger people, but some of the older ones would enjoy it too. Let's make it a church affair. Anyone who wants to can come. I'll ask Len to invite Mr. and Mrs. Curtis too. I'm sure some of the ladies will bring cake and ice cream."
"I can't decide whether you're brave or foolhardy," Sarah Jane said. "Are you sure that Colleen can face all the snubbing she's likely to get? Some of the ladies are not going to want her there."
"Then they can stay home," I replied. "I don't think we have to worry about Colleen. She can hold her own."
We decided on an evening soon after the 4th of July, and the invitation spread by word of mouth. I looked forward to the evening with eagerness, but also with some trepidation.
"I hope Gladys Burton doesn't spoil things for us,"
I said to Len.
"You know how apt she is to speak her mind."
"Anyone who doesn't expect to find a few of those people in the world is in for a hard life," Len commented. "We can't control Gladys's tongue, but we can pray that Colleen isn't driven from the church because of it. Sometimes the best-intentioned people can do the most damage." The evening was warm and pleasant, and there were about 20 people sitting around the yard in chairs or on the grass. Colleen had come with Rebecca Handy and her son Lorenzo. We introduced her to all the people she had met, and everyone greeted her cordially. Hudson Curtis was obviously smitten and was seldom more than a few feet away from her. His parents, although not usually a part of our group, seemed to be enjoying the evening. I had just dropped down on the lawn next to Len when the bomb fell. "And where are you from, my dear?" Mrs. Curtis asked Colleen.
"Chicago, ma'am. This is the first time I've ever been more than 10 blocks away from home."
Her laughter rang out. "In fact, I'm the first one of the O'Sheas to decide that there must be something better out there than a sweatshop. I'm still sure there is, even if I haven't quite found it." Mrs. Curtis's eyebrows shot up. "Sweatshop? What might that be?" "The garment factory, ma'am. We worked 12 or 14 hours a day in a shop that was hotter than the hinges of—" Colleen stopped and cleared her throat. "Well, it was hot in the summer and cold in the winter." "How could your parents allow you to do such a thing?" "Allow?" Colleen replied. "There was no choice. We all worked there to keep body and soul together." "I think any parent who would work a child like that is irresponsible," Mrs. Curtis stated firmly. "The law should look into it." Colleen's face turned pink and Hudson looked distressed. But Clara Curtis was not finished. "And are you here in North Branch visiting Mrs. Handy?" "No, ma'am. I'm living here now." Colleen looked at Mrs. Curtis defiantly. "I'm working at the Beaver Saloon." My heart dropped to my shoes, and I heard Sarah Jane groan. There was silence in the little circle for perhaps a moment, but when you're waiting for the boom to lower, it seems longer. "Well," Mrs. Curtis said finally, "I think it's rather presumptuous of you to suppose that you are eligible to join the society of decent folk with a background like that." "Ma!" Hudson exclaimed. Mr. Curtis looked decidedly uncomfortable.
I glanced over at Sarah Jane and knew at once that we were in for it. Mrs. Curtis, she said evenly.
Society does not determine decency nor good breeding, apparently. That was an extremely rude thing to say. With all due respect to your husband, I don't think your position as the bank president's wife entitles you to any more of God's grace than the rest of us enjoy. It seems to me that you owe Colleen an apology.
Mrs. Curtis blinked as though she had been struck. Then her mouth tightened into a straight line. She arose from her chair. Come, EJ, I think it is time to leave. Thank you for a lovely evening, Mrs. Williams. Hudson? Hudson rose reluctantly and looked from his mother to Colleen. Come along. Mrs. Curtis swept across the lawn, followed by her disconcerted-looking husband and son. Len jumped up and escorted them to the gate. Thank you, Sarah Jane, Colleen said. I probably brought that on myself, but the lady baited me. It really doesn't matter that she thinks I'm not fit to associate with all of you. She's entitled to her opinion. I'm sorry I made it unpleasant for everyone.
It wasn't your fault, Colleen. We won't even think about it again.
Thomas pulled Sarah Jane to her feet.
Come on,
he said. There's enough light for a croquet game.
Anybody want to play?
Several of us joined in, and conversations began again among those who were sitting around. I could have hugged you, I said to Sarah Jane. I had no idea what to say.
My problem was to keep from saying more,
Sarah Jane replied.
That was unforgivable behavior. I feel sorry for Hudson and his father.
There goes any hope of Colleen and Hudson getting together, I said.
I wouldn't say that,
Sarah Jane countered.
If he likes her well enough, he may develop a mind of his own and pursue the friendship.
At least I stirred up a new topic of conversation for the ladies to work on.
You did that all right,
Sarah Jane agreed.
It ought to be good for the summer at least.
Later, after everyone else had left, Hudson returned. Len had gone to check the animals for the night.
Mabel, could I speak to you alone?
Certainly. Let's sit down on the porch, shall we? Hudson was visibly upset.
Am I wrong to fear what people will think and say if I continue a friendship with Colleen? He asked. Not just my mother. She won't favor anyone I think about seriously. But what about other folks?
Maybe you should talk to Len about it, Hudson, I said. He knows more about these things than I do.
No, I want a lady's viewpoint. How would you feel if the town were discussing every move you made? Do you think that Colleen would rather not be put through that?
I think that would be up to her, Hudson. She can refuse to see you if she doesn't want that kind of difficulty. Have you prayed about it?
Not yet,
he admitted.
Quite frankly, I don't want the Lord to tell me I shouldn't see her. I feel like she's the one I'm going to marry.
I'd make sure it was the Lord's will before I made any plans, I advised him. That's a pretty important decision.
He nodded. I was going to ask her if I could see her home tonight. I wish my ma hadn't said those things.
I wish no one had said them, I thought. But that's in the past now. It was up to Hudson to take it from here. End of chapter 3.